Hello there, and welcome back. If you haven't yet listened to the podcast interview that I did with Africa Brooke on my podcast, please check it out. An incredible woman. She's become a dear friend of mine. And also, by the way, I did an episode on her podcast. I'll put both those links in the show notes below. She gave me pretty much a therapy session. She extracted a lot of great information from me, got me to think about a lot of stuff. So check both those things out. I was having this thought, and I actually mentioned it to Africa on her podcast. I have probably 2 or 3 trolls that are incessant. They just never stop. They comment on everything, and it's not kind. It's very, very mean-spirited. And it's not as bad as it used to be. 2022, I got a lot of trolls. There was a campaign against me that was pretty heavily financed by trolls, bots, a whole bunch of things. And it's pretty much died out, but there's always just a few people. And I assume that, well, either I'm a horrible person and evil and psychopathic and should be put to death, or they have some issues. There's some kind of pathology going on there. And I think what it is they have some level of self-hatred and they're not aware of the shadow parts of themselves. And so I become a convenient outlet to project all their unresolved stuff, that they can't deal with on me, which is pretty common, I think. I think as one becomes more and more of a public figure, you get more and more of that. And I think with the anonymity of social media and YouTube, like you don't have to put your name down there. You can just say the most vile things and you're like, XYZ43218, whatever. Nobody knows who you are. So, they might feel emboldened. But it occurred to me, and they're going to hate this, that, when somebody criticizes you for something, like, I don't know, they say like, oh, you have 2 heads. And you're like, okay, whatever, because you don't have 2 heads. You don't have 2 heads. But sometimes somebody will say something to you and it feels like a sudden shock to your system. Like I get a jolt of adrenaline and all kinds of stuff comes up and I want to defend myself. And I realize, well, that's actually good, because what happens in that moment is they're saying something and they're triggering in me some unresolved something, some insecurity, some doubt that I have. And if I don't deal with it, I just get very angry at them and I want to write horrible retorts. But if I can actually sit with the feeling I'm having, what happens is I realize, oh, this was always there. Them saying this thing brought it up, and now I get to work with it. And so what I'm realizing more and more, as I said, they're going to hate this. Every single time they do it, if I have a reaction or response, I now sit with that and I go, okay, what's that from? What insecurity is that? What am I uncertain about? And I'll sit with that feeling and I'll work through it and I'll resolve it. And then I'll go back and look at the comments and I'm like, oh, now it feels like the 2 heads thing. Like, who cares? What they're doing is they're making me stronger. They're making me more powerful. So thank you, trolls. I know you do not want to hear this, but thank you. You are making me stronger and stronger and stronger. I am becoming a strong motherfucker. So I have some thoughts on Clare Bronfman. Some of you may know that Clare Bronfman tried to get her sentence reduced, and the judge said no. At the same time, she is getting out of prison, I think, in the next few days, and she's going to a halfway house in the Bronx. My understanding is what this means is that she will have the ability to leave during the day, but she has to be back at night. Now, when she leaves, she can do all kinds of things. She can connect with her lawyers, who can connect with Ranieri's lawyers, who can connect with the loyalists. So she might have access again to the previous network that she has had less access to in prison. So why do I bring all this up? A lot of us, when Ranieri was arrested, we were less concerned in some ways than the fact that she was still out there. And I expressed as much to the FBI. I said, yeah, but the financier is still out there. And when she was arrested, we felt like, oh my goodness, like, okay, maybe we're going to have a respite from like this what did we call it? Terrorism by litigation. The worry always was, one day she's going to get out. And will she have woken up? From what I've heard, she has not woken up at all. There is a character type. I can't remember the name of the character, but it was in Game of Thrones. The really amazing actress who is in Ted Lasso. She played this ultra-religious figure. There are archetypes that are very rule-bound. They're very religious in their fervor. And to me, when I look at those archetypes, I find them very dangerous because they will do anything for an ideology. So, of course, unrelated to Clare Bronfman, I have concerns, as do some of us, that eventually she has the ability to do something to us. Now, she will be in probation for quite a while. So, I've been thinking, when all the shit went down in 2017, one of the things I learned from a friend of mine who had dealt with a number of psychopaths is he said to me, what you do is if you even sniff something, you talk about it publicly. That way, they can't hide behind, any terror you may have. You just talk and you talk and you talk and you talk. And I began doing that in 2017 and 2018. So I think that's a good way to do things. That if I even sniff anything, to talk about it. Because the thing is, a person may not do something to you personally, but they may do it via proxy. So if suddenly out of the blue, somewhere, somehow, somebody decides to sue me for something, I would be very suspicious as to why that is. So probably what I'll do is I will be very fucking vocal. I'm not shy. I'll be very vocal if any of this shit continues. Anywho, I wanted to talk a little bit about something Raniere spoke about, speaking of cults. And Raniere used to talk about promoting hate. And he would say, we're in a war against hate. Now, understand, in the war against hate, what he really meant was anybody who disagrees with me is promoting hate. That's what he really meant. But in the cult, we had the sense that we were fighting this great war on behalf of humanity, for love, for humanitarian values, and everybody who spoke against that was promoting hate. So the reason I bring this up is because I'm seeing a lot of people are parroting this idea of hate speech. People are using hate speech. The internet's full of hate speech. This social media platform is promoting hate. And it's beginning to feel to me like very familiar. I'm like, wow, this feels like Raniere shit. So I'm beginning to get concerned about, well, what is meant by hate speech? There are some countries, I think the UK is going so far as to criminalize hate speech. It's like the front runner now. And now I think they're willing to arrest comedians for it. So when I see the word hate speech, I'm starting to get very suspicious. And it seems to be in mainstream corporate-sponsored media outlets that this word is being used again and again and again and again. And the reason it's being talked about is because they say we must be protected from hate speech. You see, because we're children that can't tell the difference. So hate speech should not only be spoken up against, it should be forbidden. It should be censored because we're little children. And if you've known me long enough, you know that that kind of shit I find culty. Because this whole cry of it's for our own safety, I'm not buying it. Have we really become so pathetic that if somebody uses words that we're going to die? I don't think everybody has. I think that part of society has become so infantilized that they feel that they must be protected from somebody disagreeing with them. So I don't know exactly how to deal with free speech, but what I do know is that in a cult, free speech is bad. And anybody who disagrees with you is promoting hate. And then, of course, I relate it to right now all this hate speech stuff. Like somebody who speaks out, and it can be, by the way, somebody who's very reasonable, saying something very reasonable, and suddenly there's this mob that descends on them saying that they're I don't know, racist, homophobic, misogynistic, promoting hate, using hate speech. And I've noticed that, when I start to talk to somebody about, stuff in the world, there comes a point I start to realize like they're not actually using their own thoughts. They're actually parroting news talking points. And this is one of the shortcomings, I think, of people that feel the need to appear intelligent. I definitely had that problem. Not sure if I still do. We shall see. They watch the news as though that is reality, and then they go to their circle of friends and acquaintances and people they work with, and they parrot those talking points as though they have come up with all these ideas, and they're a good person because they watch the news. What they sound like to me is somebody who's in a closed loop in their head. A closed system of logic. And it's almost like they're only able to quote the gospel. That's all they can do. They quote the gospel of CNN. They quote the gospel of Fox. And I know there might be some people that say, well, they're very different. The one's telling the truth and the one's not. No, they're not. They're owned by the same fucking companies at the very, very top. They really are the same. And if you've ever seen, I don't know where to find this, but if you've ever seen that, the montage from a couple of years ago of all these news stations all over the US spouting exactly the same paragraph, it's fucking frightening. That is the gospel. That is what somebody way up high, maybe the corporate sponsors told, somebody, this is what has to be said. And the next thing, in every state of the US, the same paragraph was being read. It's really, really worth checking out. I'm seeing if I can try and find it and put it in the link below. I have a general rule of thumb now, and I think it came from, being in various cults for a long time. Whatever's being pushed really, really hard, one should be, suspicious of. So like, there's always a current thing, right? And what I mean by current thing, it's the thing you put around your profile, like on Facebook or Instagram or wherever. If massive amounts of money are being put into whatever the current thing is and something you need to be made aware of, I think we should be highly suspicious, because what it ends up coming from is corporations that are wanting to push something. Understand, corporations don't love you. I know there's some people that think they do. They don't. They are designed to be very, very profitable. There was one particular corporation in the last few years that was sponsoring a lot of television, a lot of pretty much everything it was sponsoring. And it turns out that same corporation paid one of the largest fines in history to, I guess, the U.S. government. I think it was a $2.3 billion fine for fraud. And that same corporation was now, in the last few years, was now sponsoring pretty much, every news program. And the thing you have to understand, if you're a corporation, you want to get your message out. You want to make sure that whoever you give money to, you have some modicum of control over what they're messaging. Preferably what you want them to do is parrot your message. And if not exactly your message, at least not anybody else's message that goes against your message. So please understand, corporations, I know this may blow people's minds, some, just a very, very few. They don't have your best interest at heart. They have profit as their interest. That's all. There's a documentary, I mentioned it before. I can't remember the name of the filmmaker. He was I think a college professor in Canada. He made a documentary called The Corporation. And what they did is they analyzed the behavior of corporations, and they found that if they had a pathology, it would be psychopathy. So that's good to know. it's really worth looking at what is being pushed, but also it's worth looking at what is being constrained. What are you dissuaded from talking about? Because that's the other end of it. When I see things that are fact checked, you see, here's the thing, like smart people tend to align themselves with fact checkers because they're the rational people, right? When we think about fact checkers, we think about like ethicists, people that have studied ethics for decades, these learned people that have like lived life and can balance things carefully. And it turns out fact checkers are just fucking corporations, right? So I know we all think we're super smart because like we agree with the fact checkers, but when I see fact checkers now, I'm like, all right, probably not true. Whatever they're saying is probably not true. So I look at what's being pushed, and I also look at what's being pulled or suppressed. In a bubble, there is no perception of censorship. When you're in a cult, you don't really know that there's censorship. Like, yes, you're being censored, but like you don't really think of it as censorship, because if you thought of it as censorship, the gig's up. You have to start questioning the leader and questioning the motives and questioning, especially like in NXIVM, everything was about nonviolence, and suppression was bad. But then at the same time, you were dissuaded from saying certain things or looking at certain media, and you weren't told you are forbidden, but it's what it meant about you that you would do that. Because if you read that stuff, the Frank Report was a great example for those of you that know what that is. If you read the Frank Report, you were promoting hate. You were promoting suppressives who had left the organization, people like me eventually, who had left the organization, and so you shouldn't look. And so in NXIVM, what happened is that for months, people didn't know what was going on because many of them did not want to read the Frank Report. And the Frank Report broke the stories way early, long before we approached the New York Times. Frank Parlata was breaking stories everywhere. But as I say, in this bubble, you don't know that there's censorship. And what I'm finding right now in a lot of the Five Eyes countries mostly is that the people that are on board with the censorship, they don't think it's censorship. The idea that police in the UK could potentially go to comedy clubs and sit there and watch something or listen to something, or if there was a complaint, they would go and they could arrest a comedian. People are like, no, that's not true. And yet, if you dig a little bit, you'll find that it actually is possible. And that's the same shit, by the way, that happened in South Africa. The censorship board would come to plays, theater. And if you broke the law, which meant talking about something or criticizing the government, you were fucked. Like at first you were fined, but then things got worse and worse and worse. So I say all this because I think it's really important, whether you think you're in a bubble or not. So just say, maybe you're in a bubble, maybe you're not in a bubble. But I think it's really important to listen to contrary views. And somebody asked me recently where do I get my news? And I go, well, I don't really listen to the news. Sometimes I'll look at it just to be like, oh, that's what's being peddled right now. What I tend to do, I walk a bunch, and what I tend to do is I listen to audiobooks or I listen to podcasts. I listen to long form thoughts. And I listen to people that many of my friends on the very progressive left would be like, well, I can't believe you listen to that person. But I listen to that person because I'm wanting to hear contrary views. And especially if I'm told that I'm supposed to hate somebody, if I'm told that that person's a horrible human being, I'm really curious. And then I want to go listen. And what I found, by the way, is I'm told that there's some soundbite that was pulled, and they said, this is what the person said. I mean, J.K. Rowling is a great example. She's vilified, beyond belief. But then when I dig deeply and listen to what she actually says, I'm like, that's actually pretty fucking reasonable. I don't really see the problem with that. But I'm told, if I am a forward-thinking, progressive person, that she is the devil. And so what I do now is I go, okay, well, you know what, then I'm going to go listen to the devil. I want to go listen. I don't want to be a religious fanatic anymore. There are more than just these two binary opposites that we've been offered, of like, well, we're the good people and they're all the assholes. There really are more than, two options for thinking. Quick commercial break. I wanted to let you guys know that this podcast is made possible because of my Patreon supporters. I really want to keep this podcast ad-free as much as possible on podcast platforms. I think on YouTube it's not ad-free. As much as I'm able to do. And the best way to do that is if you guys can support me on Patreon. So it's patreon.com/Mark Vicente. That's where you can support what I'm doing. The other thing I want to let you know about is on the 25th and 26th of May. Did I say that right? The 25th and 26th of May. I don't think I said that right. In Liverpool, in the United Kingdom, I am part of a 2-day seminar called Narcissistic Psychopathy, a Global Dark Force. It's something being organized by Richard Grannon. I'll give you a little blurb here on what's being covered and who's going to be there. So Richard Grannon is covering a new model for understanding NLP and recovery from narcissistic and psychopathic abuse at an individual and cultural level. And by the way, I don't believe that he's in support of NLP. Certainly a lot of NLP was used in NXIVM, and I personally believe it does some really bad shit. I think there's some cool stuff in there, but it's been used in shitty ways. Then Darren McGee will be exploring concepts within narcissistic family units, mini cults, and how we can unblend from them in the therapeutic process. Mark Vicente, that is I, is going to expand upon the relationship between narcissistic psychopaths and their innate compulsion to create cult-like conditions around them and how to deprogram from that experience. Sarah Davison, I think she's the divorce coach, is covering how to effectively break up. Yes, Sarah Davison is covering how to effectively break up or divorce from a narcissistic psychopathic partner and how to support yourself in the recovery process. That is important shit. Dr. Paul Taylor is going to approach the subject from a philosophical and literary angle, the myths, archetypes, and unconscious drives that cause narcissistic psychopathy to thrive in modernity. Man, that's going to be interesting. And then Professor Ed Dutton. Ed Dutton is somebody I've been following recently, and such a fascinating man. So Professor Ed Dutton is going to be sharing his latest research from an evolutionary psychology perspective on the genetic elements of narcissism and borderline personality disorder. I think all that's going to be very cool. I can't wait. So if you're in the UK, please come. I'll put the sign up in the show notes. And if it's full for any reason, I think they're live streaming it as well, I think. All right, I want to talk about somebody called Gary Brecka. I think probably a lot of you know who he is. Gary was a mortality modeling expert in the insurance industry, using people's medical records and demographic data to predict mortality. You know, in essence, how soon someone would die. And he could predict it down to the month. I was listening to a number of different podcasts with Gary, and the last one I listened to, which might have been Stephen Bartlett's podcast, Diary of a CEO, I think it was that, or maybe it was Chris Williamson, I'm not sure. Gary talks about something I think Gary has a pretty serious moral injury. And what Gary was able to do in his modeling for the insurance industry was really look at a lot of factors. Like, these were people that had massive life insurance policies, that had a lot of blood work done, and the insurance company would track them very carefully. And he could see if somebody was given, you know, somebody had a certain prognosis, and then they were diagnosed and they were given a certain kind of medication, he would know, oh, well, that medication is going to kill them in 2 years or whatever it was. Because one of the things he said is that the third largest cause of death is medical malpractice. And so he was able to model all the different issues that were going on with a person. And there was, you know, whether they ate healthy or drank or whatever, but also like medical shit that happened. Wrong medication, misdiagnosis. And so he could see and model, okay, this person's going to die, you know, in this month. And he mentioned that it was so messed up because sometimes he would model the person would die 4 years from now, and they would die 6 months earlier, and then he would be told, well done, this is great, they died early. And of course, anybody with a conscience would be like, that sounds pretty fucked up. And I think what happened, I mean, I'd love to talk to him one day. I think what happened is that Gary started to get very frustrated. And he wanted to, at one point, he saw that a misdiagnosis occurred, and he realized that the person was going to die. And he wanted to tell the person so that they could live. And I think he went to HR and said, I have to tell the person. And they said, if you do, you'll be sued. And he began to realize that he'll be sued into oblivion and destroyed. And so it was so interesting that the insurance companies seem to have better information about what to do medically than the medical profession. So this was, of course, I think, created a crisis in him, and eventually he left the mortality modeling insurance industry, and now he's speaks all over the world and gives people incredible advice. Now, here's my question. You know, when you think about people that are, you know, spoken against, do you think that the medical industry likes Gary Brecka? That's one question. Do you think that the insurance industry likes Gary Brecka? And the answer is no, they fucking probably hate him. So what do you do with someone like this? Well, kind of what I think might be beginning to happen, because he mentioned that he's getting trashed a bunch. And I imagine with somebody like Gary, they need to do everything they can to destroy him. Now, this is not some grand conspiracy. It's just pretty fucking obvious. If you're an insurance industry and you're making a lot of money, you don't want somebody who's basically saying, oh, you know, we know when someone's going to die, but we don't tell them. We withhold information from patients because they're not our patients. You know, they're not our medical patients. No, of course you don't want that. And then do you think that the medical industry and big pharma wants this kind of message out, that there are problems going on that he's talking about? Of course not. So what do you have to do? If you're the insurance companies, these big corporations, or big pharma, or the medical industry, or the medical board, or whatever it is, what are you going to do? You have to destroy him. If Gary ever listens to this, I'm not saying this should be what happens to you, but I don't think it's a big stretch to imagine that more and more shit is going to come out. And when I say come out, I mean probably fabricated, about Gary as he gets bigger and bigger. And he's getting very, very big. Someone like Gary is a threat to massive corporations. And please understand, if it's true what that filmmaker said in the documentary, The Corporation, that these corporations in essence behave like the pathology of a psychopath, then there's no compunction to, like, you know, do the noble good thing. Take these people out. Find whatever way. Now you can't just kill them. You know, that's ugly. You have to find some other way. So you know, public shaming. You know, like I don't know, some accusation of, like, I don't know, could underage sex or whatever it is that's going to destroy these people. They have to be destroyed. And it's very interesting to me when people start speaking out, especially against things that affect the corporation's interests. Suddenly, there's these people and things that come out of the woodwork. Now, it's possible that they're really bad people. It's also possible that they've touched on something and the risk of them continuing is too great to the shareholders, and so they have to take action. And the belief that this is not how things work it's very sweet. I mean, people that say, well, this isn't how things work, people are good. I think there's this sort of toxic projection of goodness that goes on, where people think like, well, I don't think this way, so nobody thinks this way. It's very, very cute. It's very, very self-involved. Now, I know that all of this is really difficult for people's psyches to handle. You know, I think there's this moment when you're a child, you think that your parents are gods and they're not fallible. And then what happens at one point is you kind of wake up, you're shocked. It's quite a shock as a child. And you wake up and you realize, like, they're fallible. Like, they don't know the answer. You know, mommy or daddy, they don't know the answer to everything. Or you see them cry, or you see something happen, and you suddenly, there's this moment, and it's like you're ripped out of the womb, metaphorically. And you realize, like, that they're not gods. It's not a conscious realization, but there is this moment of, like, oh my God. And there's a feeling of sometimes of being alone and suddenly, like, what am I going to do? A feeling of unsafety. And my belief is, I'm not a psychologist and, you know, don't understand these things very well, but my sense of it is, going back in my life, is it is the beginning of individuation. It is when you start to really have a sense of yourself as separate and sort of, standing on your own 2 feet kind of thing and making your own decisions. And as life goes on, I think that what happens is you realize more and more your parents were fucking children when they had you, you know? Like I keep thinking about like, my mom was 25 when she had me. Like, what did my mom know? Like, what did I know at 25? I was an idiot. I'm not saying my mom was an idiot because my mom listens to my podcast, by the way. So, Mom, not saying you're an idiot, but I'm saying that at 25, what do you know? But there comes this moment you realize, they're fallible. And I think that what happens is there's an interesting thing that happens in society where we haven't quite individuated. We think that the people that deliver the news, we don't think this, it's a feeling. We feel that the people that deliver the news, that tell us what's going on, it's almost like that it's some kind of godlike truth. And that, that it's like Walter Cronkite is this infallible person. And we think that all news anchors are like this, but they're not. They're not gods. They're very fallible human beings. And all news is financed by, these massive, corporate conglomerates that don't love you. And I think there's this wake up that has to happen. And I know it's difficult for people's psyches to really realize that the people that are in charge, some of them are complete fucking morons. And then some of them are just Machiavellian. There is a percentage of them that are Machiavellian that not only do they not care about you, they hate you. If you really study some of the dark triad, dark tetrad types, they have a hatred for human beings. And it is entirely possible that there's a percentage of these kinds of people that are in very, very powerful positions. So I think we have this infantilization struggle on a societal level. And to blindly believe that they have our best interests at heart and they love us is really to act and think like an infantilized cult member. So what's the answer to this? Well, I mean, I think personally that the answer to this is I don't know how effective we can be against these massive conglomerates, but certainly if we stop our all-like behavior, if we stop worshiping them, I think that goes a long way. And how do we do that? Well, I think you have to have a really strong, healthy sense of self where you have the locus of control inside of yourself and that you don't seek to be infantilized. There's a course that Richard Grannon and I did a little while back called Decoding Cults and Narcissists. I'll put the link in the show notes as well. And we talk a lot about how do you prevent yourself from getting into these narcissistic relationships, getting into these different cults. What are the tendencies that are in play that make us more susceptible? And one of the things we talk about, and I really think this is true, is this yearning towards infantilization, which I think is happening at a societal level, makes us much more vulnerable to people that want to be our big mommies and daddies, And I know childhood offers this kind of fantasy, and I think what's happening is we're still holding on to it. And so we talk a lot in the course about infantilization, and I think I mentioned like wanting to be back in the amniotic fluid. There's a part of us that wants to like not have anything to worry about and have somebody else take care of everything. And I think that is contributing to Machiavellian people having a lot of power. If we were to stop worshiping them, if we were to stop being delusional and thinking like whatever they say is best for me, I'm telling you, they're just like you. They poop, they do this, they eat, they whatever. They're just like you. They have the same maybe fears and worries, and some of them are not good people. Stop worshiping them for the love of whatever. Stop worshiping them. I think that it is true that childhood offers this beautiful fantasy of being back in this sort of metaphorical amniotic fluid. But the thing is, in that dependent state, you can't do anything. You are utterly dependent on forces outside of you. So my belief is, and I really wish I'd known this decades ago, my belief is to move away from infantilization, because cult leaders want you infantilized. They want to be the father figure, the mother figure, the whatever. They want you to be like little children. In fact, there was one group I was in, we were always told, be like little children. And thousands of people behave that way, including myself. What I'm understanding more and more now is that while childhood offers this delusion, you have no choice. The best way to have choice is to actually grow up. And I think that is the antidote. As always, thank you for listening to me ramble on, and stay curious.